Hello and welcome back to DriveDriverDriven. My name is Humble and I'm going to show you guys the progress I've got on the Blunicorn teardown. Basically, it looks a lot different from the last time you saw it with the body on. And now we've moved to a point where we were able to strip the body off, get the glass out, though not super successfully, and tear down everything from the car that needs to be replaced. And I'll show you in a moment why that's important. But for now, let's look at the chassis. So as you can see, pretty much stripped down to a chassis, potentially just a roller. I do have it on these caster boards here so I can push the chassis around. But for the most part, it's been pretty stripped. You can see more clearly some of what's left over of the fire retardant and mud and all the garbage that was around. Down here, this is the area of the chassis where that fire was really centered around. This was right behind where the fuel tank used to sit. And speaking of fuel tanks, this top tank, this was really the fuel tank that was on fire, and if it weren't for Fuel Safe, I probably wouldn't be talking to you about it. So, I mean, looking around behind the tank, it got hot enough to melt the aluminum cell, but the bladder itself did not rupture. So, I'll be getting another one of those. But elsewhere you see, like, these are the luggage pods that were hiding some of the damage. The engine wiring harness is over here. The chassis wiring harness is here. And again, you could see how stripped away it was. And I'll come back to that in a bit. We found that the battery had swelled and cracked on the bottom from being shorted. And then, a pile of control cables, plumbing, and whatnot that all had to come out. Now the deal is, the car was covered by insurance. Now that seems to catch a lot of people out. This is a street car; it's not a track-only car, and it did have to meet, certain state requirements to be considered a street car. I had to pass a smog inspection. It didn't have to have cats, but it did have cats on it. And had to have safety glass and proper seat belts, blah, blah, blah. But it was insured like a regular street car for about the same amount as you would register like a Porsche GT3. And you could replace this car with a GT3 for its purposes on the track. If the engine on the GT3 exploded and the car caught fire and it suffered similar damage, instead of being repaired by, like myself, it would be repaired by a shop. Well, in this case, I'm the shop, and I have to do the work on the car. So I have to prove to the insurance company that each part was damaged, associate that with a line item in a claim, and then supply pictures of that damaged part. So I'll show you an example that I pulled aside here. And this is also part of why this process is taking a lot longer than just tearing the car down and rebuilding it. Each component of the build that was damaged by the fire needs to be included in the claim to basically so I can get compensation and order another one. So in this case, we have the clutch slave cylinder and the clutch line that goes all the way up to the master cylinder. The clutch slave cylinder was damaged by the fire and the seals are melted inside. And then the clutch line was damaged, as you can see this black bit here. The liner inside melted and it was leaking. So I have to submit each of these as a different line item, and each one will be replaced separately. But because I'm my own shop, I have to supply this to the insurance company so that they can reimburse me for the cost to fix everything. Something else I wanted to show you guys before I do it is all of this debris and everything that was caught up under the car, the fire retardant here on the chassis, you know, see the kind of this ugliness from the burn and all that garbage there. I wanted to show you guys before I cleaned it up and after I cleaned it up, just to show you kind of the effort it takes and to get a good before and after. Because you know, right now, especially these tubes in this area, you know, the powder coat's all been burnt off or whatever, but I want to try and clean it to see if it's just a superficial damage, which it looks like at the moment, and then we can prime and repaint these with like a Por 15 or some rust preventative. Since these tubes are more or less hidden, I'm not too worried about it. You know, the looks, the one you're mainly going to see is up here, and I'm not sure how to fix this, but we'll see in a moment. I'm going to drag this out and pressure wash it, and we'll see how she looks afterward. Oh, so fast forward a little bit of cleaning and some cataloging, and I'll show you what I've been up to. As I mentioned before, I have to take a picture of all the damaged items. Well, I've got them all laid out since I just did that, so I figured I'd show you guys kind of what I was talking about and everything that was damaged on the car in the fire that we can see down here on the ground. What you're not going to see here is the body, which is over behind the garage, but we have our 2 fuel cells. That one up there is what was in the middle of the fire. Our oil tank, and this is our oil to water heat exchanger, which is just full of garbage from the engine exploding. These are our fuel lines primarily, both pressure and feed lines from the tanks, as well as the balance line that goes between the tanks. This pile is our clutch slave, our brake, our rear brake lines, our control cables, so that is like the e-brake cable and the shifter cables, and also the rear clamshell opening cables. Those are all burned up or melted. This pile is our water system, or parts of our water system, so our heater lines, our header tank, our catch tank, brackets, kind of miscellaneous here is these are the struts that hold up the rear canopy. Our starter was damaged from the heat. Our alternator partially melted, so that's not going to be any good. In this pile with the wiring is our engine wiring harness and our chassis wiring harness. Both of those burned up pretty good. The battery is toast because when the harness melted, it bridged and created a dead short, and the battery burst, so there's a big crack on the bottom of that. And this pile is our what's left of our motorsport wiring harness. So this is the AIM wiring harness for the AIM sensors, the sensor hubs, the CAN extenders, all that stuff got burned up, plus a couple sensors like oil temp, oil pressure, water temp, and that stuff that comes off the engine side. Our 2 filler necks that had some fire damage, and then our intake, the MSD Air Force, and then the beautiful airbox from GD that got some fire damage and didn't really melt, but you could see it got a little crispy, and the outlet, or yeah, rather the inlet, whatever, for the airbox down there isn't really true circle anymore. Let's see. And, you know, of course, what's left of the engine over here, the crank, all that. The exhaust was good. There's a few other bits in here, like the motor mounts are actually melted. There's a solid rubber block that sits in here that's just flat melted. And then other things like our clutch and flywheel and the rear transmission mount and all that stuff. But for the most of the fire damage stuff, this is pretty much most of it. It sure doesn't look a lot like it doesn't look like a lot when it's all out of the car. And then, you know, of course the engine, but this is really what it boils down to. And unfortunately, this sits underneath all of the body. It's all tied to the chassis. And then speaking of, here's what our chassis looks like. So cleaned up and dried off. The tube here, I mean, these don't seem annealed. They're a little rough for wear, but other than that, I think they can be sanded down, cleaned up, and repainted. Getting this garbage off, all the sealant and stuff, that's going to be kind of a pain. This rear bulkhead needs to come out and get cleaned up. A lot of the gold heat shield was affected by the fires. If you can see kind of down in that area, and then down over here in the middle. I tried to clean it up as best I could, but you know, even these clips got melted. But yeah, down in this area, the alternator sat right down here, and you know, it was basically right in the middle of the fire, so there was no helping it. And then even our AC compressor there has seen better days. But other than that, the rest of the brake systems are good. Everything up front was untouched, more or less. There's some, you know, corrosion from the battery, but once that's treated and cleaned up, it should be fine. But yeah, that's kind of where everything's at right now. I'll wheel the car back in, get everything cleaned up, and basically it's time to get our final claim in. We're going to estimate the number of hours it takes for the rebuild, and then basically assign the you know, purchase value for these parts for replacement, and get that claim submitted and get my order into the factory to get these replacement parts. I will be headed to the Ultima factory here next month, and I hopefully I can take you guys around the factory. We'll see. At a minimum, I'm going to try to get a bunch of pictures. If not a bit of a factory tour for everyone. So stay tuned and we'll see if we can make that happen. But for now, I think that's going to do it. And I'll talk to you guys next time.